Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm talking to Michael R. Miller and we're going to get into the depths of self-publishing and talk all about it because I'm coming to this very much a novice. There's tons of information out there from a lot of people that I don't know and I don't trust, and Michael is a trusted source. He writes within fantasy and he's done exceptionally well for himself. So I thought he's the right kind of person to talk to about all this. But before that, let's talk a bit about your background, how you got into fantasy and then how you got into writing. So where did it start? What were you reading as a kid growing up?
Right. Oh, all the way back. Yeah, I think it all started really. I mean, coming out of the cinema, seeing Fellowship of the Ring. I don't know what age I was. I was quite young.
Mm.
You have to look at the exact timeline. I was either 9 or 10, something like that, quite fairly young. Came out of the cinema and that was me. I was hooked for life then. That was the nail in the coffin, I think. I mean, I've never been more blown away ever in my entire life. So yeah, but 9 or 10, so that was right as like Harry Potter was obviously big. That was a good time for fantasy sci-fi, wasn't it? You had Star Wars prequel movies too. For all their faults, there was a lot of good content around then. So you had like that, you had Harry Potter, you had Lord of the Rings, all this stuff was coming out. Also Eragon was also around this time. So just these big series, to this day, they remain massive. And that's what I was growing up with. So yeah, all of that, reading those series is what got me into it. But then I did sort of come away from reading. I always had this little notion that I'd like to write a story. I had an idea floating around in my head since I was quite young, but I never took it seriously. I don't think many people do when they're younger. You don't get a lot of encouragement to do creative writing. You don't get a chance to do a lot of that in school, so it just kind of got left in the back burner. And then I actually stopped reading for some time just because I was reading a lot of stuff from my English and history courses. But around university, I got back into reading in a big way with audiobooks. I had done audiobooks as a kid. And then when Audible came along and we had smartphones and stuff, it all kind of married up again. And I got back into reading with the Mistborn series, which I had never heard of, never even knew who Brandon Sanderson was, nothing like that, which is browsing on Audible and just sort of came across the Final Empire and thought, oh, that looked quite good. And then back in I got. So yeah, that's where that started. In terms of when I started writing, that was, and apologies for anyone that's heard this story 1,000 times before, but I came out of uni, went to do a law course in London, which is the compressed degree. So rather than doing 3 years, they compress it into 1 year. So it's a very intensive course. And that combined with sort of moving to a new place and having other unfortunate things, a bad breakup, this sort of stuff. Like I had a bit of a quarter life crisis around Christmas of that year. This was 2014. And I was like, I don't want to continue this. I don't want to go be a lawyer. The only thing I really wanted to do was write that book that I'd always thought about writing. So I threw myself into that. I finished the course and I wrote in the evenings. The kind of energy that I wouldn't have now. I wouldn't be able to kind of keep that up now. But I managed to finish the course, which was good. And I self-published that first book later that year. So that was late 2015, the first book came out. And then, yeah, I just sort of kept at it. And thankfully it worked out. But, it was quite a scary first few years.
So you jumped into it full-time straight away?
Jumped in. Not quite full-time though. So put the first book out in November 2015. And about that same year, I picked up some retail work in London over Christmas at a department store called Finnick. And that was okay because at Christmas, it's very busy. They give you loads of shifts. It's very busy. It sort of feels fine. But then once it got to the new year, it was a 0 hours contract. So I got very few shifts and it was very boring. But I was sort of writing in and around that, working on the second book. Interned at a magazine the summer of 2016. And then as I was publishing book 2 in, when was that? Early 2017, I also managed to pick up a job at Bloomsbury in London, Bloomsbury Publishing. So I was working at Bloomsbury for most of 2017, just sort of like low level in the digital marketing department, not really involved in the marketing. I was doing sort of data work and helping them prepare their data to move to a new CRM system and stuff like this. But I was in the digital marketing department. So I was seeing what they were doing and what they weren't doing. And I got a kind of sense for just how that publisher was working and various things. But it was then later in 2017 that I met Taryn Mafru and Brooke Aston. And we started Portal Books in early 2018. And that was when I was able to. I couldn't do three things at once. I couldn't be writing my books and publishing, working at Bloomsbury, and starting a publishing company. That was definitely too much. By this time, my books were doing not well enough to go full time, comfortably, but well enough in conjunction with starting this company that I thought that's the right move to make. But then it was 2018. The third book in the first series came out, and then later that year I revised the first book very heavily, rewrote a lot of it, put it all together into a box set, and the box set came out in September of 2018, and it just blew up, just went crazy. It took a little while. It was a slow burn, but towards the end of September, it went up all the way up to number 94 in all of Amazon.com.
Wow.
Out of every category ranking.
Do you know why? Do you know why suddenly there was an explosion? Was it just like something
I think one of these perfectly, just serendipity, that kind of perfect meeting of hard luck and hard work with luck and the right timing, I think. In 2018, box setting. So in the office, we're finding it quite a useful strategy at this point was you could put a series into a 99-cent box set, but that box set would also be in Kindle Unlimited. So you could push a lot of 99-cent sales on the box set, and there's a lot of value for money there, right? So a lot of people would buy them. It's obviously a great buy. That would push it up the charts, and that would give you more visibility. And then just naturally, some people in Kindle Unlimited would download it because downloading for free is still better than paying $1, But of course, if they read the whole thing in Kindle Unlimited, you're getting the full payment, as if they were because if they read the whole series in Kindle Unlimited, you're getting the full series worth of Kindle Unlimited money if they go through the whole thing. So you were sort of loss leading on the paid sales in order to get the full KU money out of what, for anyone, it would be 3 books, 4 books. So it was a strategy that worked because at the time Amazon didn't seem to mind. After this, even as early as 2019, it seemed that they didn't like this idea. Maybe they thought it was devaluing things even too much even for them. Because it started to be the case that 99-cent sales stopped being ranked in the same way as a full paid sale. It used to be that one 99-cent sale seemed to get you the same rank increase as a paid sale. And then at some point around 2019, maybe 2020, it kind of changed to or maybe we don't know, but it seemed like more like a 10-to-1 ratio. You'd have to get 10 discounted sales to kind of equal the same increase as a paid sale, if that makes sense. So the strategy therefore kind of melted away. You don't see it happening anymore because you can put out a box set at that price, and you might get a lot of sales, but you won't necessarily get that same rank momentum. So it won't have the same effect. So it was again something that worked in 2018 wouldn't work now. This is quite often what happens in all aspects of publishing, especially in indie publishing. So I had seen lots of people do this, and I thought, well, I'm going to try it too. And maybe it was just timed right. Maybe it was just the fact that it came at a point where readers were beginning to notice it, and so they were more willing to do it. But it wasn't yet too saturated. I'm not 100% sure. It didn't start off, flying out the gates. It started off really quite slow. In fact, I thought in the first week, well, I gave that a try. It's doing okay. It's getting some page reads. That's great. And I'll just, write my next book and we'll just keep moving on. It's contributing and that's nice. But just over that month, it just kept going up a little bit at a time until eventually towards the end, it just exponentially just boomed. I believe 2 things I think helped. I did a lot of mailing list swaps back then with a lot of people, and I had a different offer on every day swapping. So every day of September, someone was emailing out to their followers to say, hey, this box set is out. It meant it was quite hard to schedule all my return favors. It took me years to go through all that and get to the returns. So I did that, and then towards the end of the month, it got posted onto Reddit Fantasy. And back then, I guess they were less. They didn't mind so much, or they weren't as they weren't policing those kinds of posts as they were. I didn't post it; someone else posted it. Just saying, hey, this 99-cent box set is here. It looks like a good deal. And it got 1,000 odd upvotes. And so I think a lot of people, that was the big spike up to number 94, but it was already ranking around the 200s by that point.
Yeah.
So that was definitely like sealed the deal, I think, on it. So yeah, I think a combination of the right timing, the right place, a strategy that turned out worked in the slow burn sense. I guess a bit of luck, but that's what kind of gave me my big break, and then I was definitely full time from that point on.
Right. So with Amazon, I guess, and since then there's been a number of changes. As you say, they don't tell you about any of these things, do they? You have to kind of work
No,
them
no,
out by
no.
you're
They
constantly
just
looking at the
do.
stats,
They just
seeing
do.
that's
Yeah.
wait, why is that changed? And you have to constantly kind of work out what's going on and investigate stuff.
Yeah, things just change. You think, and there's no announcements. A lot of the time, they shift how they are classifying a category, or they kick books out of a category, and
Right.
it's just there's no communication. You just have to be mindful and see what's going on and talk to other people and try to collectively figure out what's happening. But yeah, at no point have they ever said, "Hey, we don't like this 99 cents box of that stuff. We're going to stop that." They just kind of quietly did something that made it less viable. And it would make it would just be it would make a lot more sense if they just said, "Hey, we don't like you guys doing this. We're going to put a stop to it." Right? And we'd be like, "All right, okay." At least we know,
Yeah.
that would be better. Yeah, communication with Amazon through KDP pretty much non-existent. So yeah, be braced for that if you're going to dive in.
Yeah, this is it. So you've now had a 2 full series out recently, and here's my question: series or standalone? If you were going to start self-publishing, being an indie publisher now for the first time ever, would you go for a series or would you go for standalone? Because it's very different in traditional. There's lots of flip sides that don't work the same way, and this is what I'm curious about.
Yeah, no, I think you want a series. I think you still want a series. The current series that I'm writing, the third book came out in July, but there will be 5 of those, Nate, and so I've got 2 more to go. So it's not quite finished yet. But you definitely want a series. I have what turned out to be a standalone book in the lit RPG category called Battlespire that came out 2019. It did very, very well for a while. It burned really bright as the sun for a couple of months. But that genre in particular, you really need to follow up with sequels very, very quickly.
Right.
Which I didn't for several reasons. It does work as a standalone. It all wraps up in one story, but that has been kind of left to one side. And without sequel support, it just died a death. That's like RPG, fantasy, epic fantasy will work a little differently. But I do think if you look at any KDP graph, the dashboard of any offer, any successful self-published offer, you will see the same story. You will see the launch spike. Actually, no, what you will see initially is probably nothing. You'll see a kind of very low, steady little line. A sequel will come out, the bar will get a little higher, and then it'll come back down. But it'll come back down just a little higher than before. And then by the time you get to like maybe a 3rd book or a 4th book, the line starts to get a lot higher. And the gradient falling back down is a lot more smooth. So those sequels really support the first book a lot. Like still, I think the best way to sell a book is to write the next book that is connected, because it does push things back through the algorithm. As you are out there, it gives you a chance to talk about a series over probably years. It obviously depends how fast you're writing and stuff like that, but you're going to have a good few years working on a series, and so over that whole stretch of time, you'll be talking about that series all the time. Whenever you're interacting, whenever you're reaching out to the viewers, that gives people a chance to associate that series with you. So it gives that opportunity for people to learn who you are, hear the series name several times, and then eventually try it. Because if they just hear a standalone once, the next time they hear about you, it's some other book, and then I think it becomes harder to kind of drill in. And it's part of the 7 touches, right? People talk about 7 touches in marketing.
Yeah.
If your name is associated with a different book every time they hear you for the first, initially, I think that would be more confusing. It will make it harder for people to be like, I've heard about that book so many times, I'm going to try it now, because they won't hear about it as often. There's always going to be those outliers where a standalone just goes crazy, but I think in the most general sense, a series is a really good place to start. Even if it's just a short trilogy, that's still, I think, a lot better than a standalone.
It's interesting because in traditional publishing, I know there are some really long running fantasy series. You know, there's like
Yeah.
Malazan and there's Wheel of Time and, you know, Adrian Tchaikovsky did 10-book Shadows of the Apple and a bunch of others. But traditionally, in traditional publishing, especially more recently, they're encouraging shorter series rather than long series because you get that big spike, as you said, on the first book, and then the second book a little less, and then the third book a little less. It doesn't build the other way. There's like a tailing off, but everyone will try the first book in a series. Everyone will have a go and see what it's like. But then it's that thing of if they didn't really enjoy it, they won't continue. And longer than 3 books is quite a big ask. Whereas it seems in indie, it's like a longer series works. And my thing is always, surely it's the same fans. Some of them, there has to be like an overlap between the two groups of readers.
There must be, but at the same time, I think it depends on, because I do think the markets for different formats are completely separate for the most part. So like people will read ebook primarily, or people will listen to audiobooks primarily, or people will read print primarily. And sometimes there'll be occasionally people will pick up a different format, but they'll mostly stick to the one that they like best.
Interesting.
Everyone's decided that by now, I think.
Right.
Because and that's why you can see, even in the indie community, some people can sell tons of ebooks, but very little in audio. And sometimes vice versa. Normally it's the other way around, but sometimes you sell a lot more audio than ebook. I actually happen to sell better in audio than in ebook. Well, in terms of units, it's sort of similar, but the audio is disproportionate, if that makes sense. Sometimes people sell a lot of print. That's very unusual. But I do think it's kind of like slightly separate readership. So the people who are reading a lot of print books and going into bookshops, going into Waterstones or Barnes and Nobles, they don't necessarily think of themselves as being a traditional reader. They just like print books. But if you go into shops, that's all you're going to find. You're only going to find traditionally published books. So that does become your ecosystem, even if you're not consciously aware of it. But yeah, if they were presented with my book or another indie's book, they may well pick it up. It's just they're not necessarily seeing it because they're not. So I think I think they can be slightly separate markets in that sense. But I think you're right that like they are still the same readers. What they want is probably similar. I wonder whether it's a case of more what the publisher is valuing, and I'd be interested to hear what you think of this. Because what the value of a series for me as a author isn't, yes, the latest book in this series will naturally sell a lot less copies than the first book. That's always going to be the case. But when I bring out a new book, that book does well, and that's great. But then book 1 and book 2 get a nice uplift just from the algorithms, from just there being a lot of chatter around it. It brings in new people, and I obviously benefit hugely from the sales that come in book 1 and book 2. So the idea of putting a new book in a series is sort of more about keeping book 1 up and just getting more sales from the previous books as much as it is about the new book. And I mean that must be the same with the publishers. They must see that the benefit of that, but it depends on what their mindset is, and maybe do they value it? Do they value the idea that a later book in a series might take a while to make its money back, but if books 1, 2, 3, and 4 leading up to that 5th one get a nice uplift, that's still profit, that's still sales. But do they see it the same way? I wonder if that's maybe why it's different.
Yeah, it's an odd thing. I think not all of them. I think some traditional publishers are constantly chasing the next big thing, right. And so
they just want it to be big.
Yeah, and so if a book doesn't do well immediately, then there isn't as much money being poured into the marketing and for that book and that series and that author, which makes sense up to a point. But equally, when the second book in a series comes out, you would think they'd put more money in to kind of get the series uplift, as you say. And I don't often see that as enough because they've got limited resources and they've gone on to the next thing. And as traditionally published authors, we're still having to do a lot of the promotion ourselves. It's kind of par for the course now. Everyone does it. But there's that thing of if you don't see an immediate lift, how much time do they focus on that when, hey, look, here's this new author that's got a load of buzz, or it sold 100,000 units on Self-Pub, but now we've acquired it and now we're traditionally publishing it. Let's see that. So I think there's some of that. We have to be our own cheerleaders and champions. And, my agent is as well. But I think some publishers lose interest. And I think the other thing you're talking about is bringing out the next book and the next book. I think the time between books hurts traditionally published authors sometimes. Like it's a year, or it could be even longer between books. And that is a massive struggle, especially when you're trying to establish yourself.
Yeah, I can see all of that. I think they're maybe more time starved than resource starved. You know, if I don't know quite how many books people be putting out in a year, but I know from the experience running Portal that even when you've got a smaller list, best will in the world, you've only got so much time and energy and attention. And so, you know, if something is proving a real head off a brick wall trying to sell it, you kind of move on to the thing that's a little bit easier. I can appreciate that. It's tricky. At the same time, I know in my own books, like the first, it took 3 years. Like it took 3 years until I got a break, and I did in a slightly unusual method. It didn't work first time. If I had gone, if that same sort of thing had happened in Trad, I would have probably been dead in the water. It built up slowly. So something can take a while to get going. So it is really hard to find the balance, isn't it? But on the timing, you know, I think, like I say, I do think a lot of people that are, if they're used to buying their books from a print shop and they're kind of used to that traditional model, they probably are used to things taking a full year or more. Obviously, indies can benefit from releasing more rapidly, but I've only put out 1 book a year ever. I've never put out more than 1 book a year.
Interesting.
And in 2022, I didn't put out a book at all. But 2022 was still my best year from a profit and loss perspective until this year, because I put out a new book.
Yep.
So, you know, even in indie, if things are set up the right way, if you've got, you know, a good steady state of sales, you don't need to chase the algorithm. You don't need to throw books out constantly. It can be a very powerful method, and people do it to great effect, but you don't have to do it that way. So I suspect the timing. I suspect the timing issue is only as dangerous as your ability to remind people that the series is there. Like, what is the reach? And if, you know, if you're struggling to build some followers or build a mailing list and stuff like that as a traditional offer, and then the publisher isn't necessarily alerting people to the fact that the sequel's coming out, that might be what kills it, rather than the time itself. Because if there was a lot of energy put into reminding people, hey, book 2 is coming, and this was book 1, and you could probably get around that. You know, because that's when you're an indie offer, that's all you're doing. You've just got focus on one thing, right? What is the next book coming out? That's all you're talking about, and that's all you're worrying about. So I can see, the onus is definitely on the author still, and I would always advise this if you're trad or indies. You want to make sure you've got your own mailing list of some description, one social media platform that you like using, and you can build it. You don't have to use them all, but you've got to help get the word out, because just in case your publisher doesn't have the time for it for whatever reason, or they're not alerting their own fans, you've got to do it. So I think that might be the problem if on those long time scales, because we know that there's some books where they take forever, but they're still massive. So
well, they haven't finished their series, but they've still sold a lot of copies because people are just desperate for them, you know.
Yeah, the hardest part of all of this is just making people aware your book exists. I mean, you know, like books can come out and they don't sell very well, but it's not because the entire world has rejected it. Most of the world doesn't even know it's there. That's the problem. That's the hardest part, is awareness, and catching people, getting enough awareness over enough time that people, you know, just that 7 touches, they see it. They might take them 2 years to remember to buy it, but they'll get there eventually if you keep making them aware it's there. It's that kind of long-term approach.
So that, which brings me, I guess, onto advertising. As a traditionally published author, I'm not actively putting money into publishing. I'm trusting that the publisher itself will do that. But as an indie author, you're in control of everything. So are you constantly putting money into advertising through Amazon and KDP and everything else to promote, and as you said, to make people even know your book exists, never mind do I want to read it? It's like, oh, this book is out. Oh, what book? What is it?
Yeah. Yeah, I do a heck of a lot less than I used to, thankfully.
Right.
I don't know whether I don't know whether I was always overspending in some ways, or whether it's a bit of a case of pushing a boulder up a hill. And I got the boulder high enough up the hill that I don't need to push so hard anymore. You know, like
Right.
it's starting to roll back down. Because there was there was what year was it? Was it 20? I think it was 21. I think I spent like 50 grand on advertising,
Wow.
which is which was probably too much, but it seemed to be working. So you don't want to, you don't want to kill it. But I got pretty. That was when I had the first book in the new series out and my backlist, and I was just really determined that the new book, that first book, Ascendant, was going to work, and I had to build it up nice and big so that I would have this long series. Once the second book in that series came along, I started to really slash back on the spend, because I had suspected that I was overdoing it for a while.
Right.
But I gradually chipped away. I didn't just turn it all off at once, because it is a bit like a sacrifice to the gods. You're never quite sure what's working and what's not. So I was running Facebook ads for my audio, because that seemed to work extremely well for my audio box set. And I know it did, because the audio box set, which is 46 hours long for one credit. So again, enormous value for money.
Yeah.
That had been out for like 6 months, and it sold a nice little bit. But during COVID, I just started advertising it to be like, hey, it's great value. And immediately it started selling a lot more. Right? And it just continues, and then just to this day has kept selling a lot, even though there's no longer any ads in it. So again, something about what it wasn't selling. I did these ads, it started selling, and then it seemed to get embedded into the algorithm, and now it just sort of keeps going and keeps selling, partly from that, and maybe because my new series is quite hot, so people are going back and trying that now. Again, boulder up a hill, very unusual. But Facebook for ebooks I never found very effective. I think for epic fantasy, I'm not sure if they ever were effective. Some people say so. I'm not convinced. I did tracking links at one point. You're not supposed to, but I decided to just screw it and put the tracking links in, because I wanted to see what was happening. And you were getting really terrifying results where there was 2,000 clicks on these affiliate links and not a single purchase, not just of my stuff, but of anything, because the affiliate links will track any purchase on Amazon within 24 hours. So if they go buy a pair of socks, I'll see it. There was nothing. Thousands of clicks, nothing. I was like, this is bots. This is bot. I couldn't, it's just not right. Something's not right. So I decided that was not working, but it did for audio. It absolutely did for audio. I have no other way to explain how it works. So it's just like I say, sacrificing to the gods. So I no longer spend money on Facebook at all, partly for that reason, partly because after the US election in 20 or 21, whichever year it was, they were, there was a lot of crackdown on the ads, and I think fantasy got affected a lot because we used lots of words like war and kings and stuff like that. Because anyone running ads for about 3 weeks around the election, they were getting shut down constantly. So then that, coupled with the iOS privacy change, meant it was much harder to target people effectively as well.
Right.
After that, they just stopped. They just weren't very good anymore. So I have now entirely turned Facebook off, but it was a nice gradual decline. And since I turned it off, nothing has changed. So for some time, I was spending money probably needlessly, but it wasn't too much. So that's okay. I do keep Amazon ads running in the background all the time.
Yep.
Amazon ads, if you trust the data, and we just have to trust the data because we trust the KDP dashboard. I mean, we have no choice. We just have to kind of take it on faith. They can absolutely get you a good chunk of sales, a great chunk of page reads, particularly in a launch month. I think during Ascendant's launch month in September 2020, if the dashboards are to be believed, about half of the page reads came from my Amazon ads.
Wow.
So very, very, very powerful. After that first month, it really declines in its effectiveness, because the Amazon ad system seems to serve your book based on whether it's already hot. So it's one of those chicken and egg things. Like if your book's really hot and selling really well, and Amazon knows who to sell it to, you'll get much more impressions at cheaper clicks, and you'll sell more. If your book is struggling and Amazon isn't sure who to send it to, it'll cost you a lot more for the clicks, and it's going to be, you know, so it's one of those frustrating chicken and egg scenarios. And after a launch month, your relevance in the system dies naturally. Even if you're doing well, it just thinks, oh, that's old now. It's 30 days old. That's old. You know, it kind of chops it down. Amazon ads, so they can work. They definitely can work, but they are impossible to scale, or I found them impossible to scale, meaning just because you have a setup that looks like it's doing pretty well, if you just doubled the budget, it doesn't necessarily even spend that money. So Facebook will always spend your budget. Amazon actually, it can actually be hard to spend your budget. You can say spend $50, and one day it'll spend 30, and one day it'll spend 45, and then one day it'll spend 60 randomly. So it's hard to make it spend more. And even if it does, even though you've changed nothing but just said, yeah, spend double because I want double the results, doesn't happen. It can spend double and then just the results are the same. You don't see a shift, you don't see a movement. But there's some. So again, this is just my experience. Other people will contest this. There'll be gurus out there that think, you know, you're talking nonsense. My experience has been, and again, this is all from epic fantasy perspective, which is has its own quirks. There's other genres that, you know, probably work even better for ads. I think you can find the sweet spot where you can spend enough that you're comfortable with. You get sales, you get Kindle reads, you're getting impressions. It's kind of like life support. It's like background brain dead advertising, you know, awareness of your book that definitely works, and it's good to have on. Unfortunately, we can't scale it. If we could scale it, we'd all be scaling right up, you know, all the way to the top, because that's what you would do. But that's so I like to have them on in the background, but at the point now where I'm trying not to check them too often. I'll maybe come in and check them every couple of weeks, and if there's any dodgy looking keywords or dodgy books that are getting a lot of impressions and no clicks, I just turn those off, you know, stuff like that. So it's come down. So yes, that's a long-winded answer of saying, yeah, I used to spend a lot of money on advertising. Now I spend a lot less. So I'm really down to spending between £1,000 and £1,500 on Amazon ads each month. And that's about it in terms of paid advertising.
Still, regulatory speaking, that's still quite a lot of money to spend, but obviously you're getting the return to justify spending that much.
Yeah, I mean, I am, and it's hard to say because a new debut's experience will be very different from my experience. It'll be very different. Even when I put out book one in the new series, I still had the backlist and I still had some existing audience. So it definitely helped launch that new one, you know. I think starting out now, I don't know if I would throw open the Amazon ads door straight away until maybe you've got 2 or 3 books, because then you have the benefit of the sale through.
Yeah.
And you probably have the benefit of, well, hopefully, slightly more sales and a slightly more relevance in the system that might help you. But if you did want to start up a first book, I would just say, you know, keep the bids very, very low, keep your budget very low, and just don't worry that it's not going like the clappers, because like I say, it's really hard to scale it. And if you just have that little bit burning in the background, that's still good. You don't need to spend hundreds of dollars a day. In fact, don't do that. You know, you can try to spend like $10 a day with very low bids and just play around with and see what keywords do work. So when you do want to kind of up it later, you've got a little bit of experience. But I think that the most important thing is to get the next books out. That's always going to be the most important thing. So don't throw money into it until you're comfortable to do so. You're much better spending money on a cover than on ads in the first place, you know. So if that's why I would put most of your budget initially, is just get a bloody great cover, because everything's going to be easier if you've got a good cover.
Yeah, I guess that was the next thing I was going to say is, you know, finding artists. It's a lot easier now with social media to find a good digital artist and good. But there again, with learning about the advertising, was it a case of you learning about the covers within your genre and saying, you know, what seems to be working? I'd like something similar to this because that would fit with my book.
Yeah, so I learned. So the first trilogy, Dragon's Blade, I had a UK cover designer who worked in traditional, and she made these really, really, well, I made really nice covers, but they were a bit more UK market minded.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Again, on average, again, there's going to be exceptions. We know there's some exceptions. On average, the UK market likes graphic symbols or art that isn't too illustrative and subtle art. The US prefers, say, characters on the cover, like straight up character illustrations on the cover.
100%.
You will get books, you will get US books where it's the other way around. But generally speaking, that's the case. So my first series sold proportionally better in the UK than the US, just relative to the size of their markets.
Mm-hmm.
And I suspected that was part of the reason. I also wrote that first series in UK English, and I got a lot of annoying people in the US thinking I was spelling every word incorrectly, which wasn't the case. Because you can only put up one edition, right? You can only put up one English version. So now I write in US English because that's
interesting. Okay.
And ever since I started that and copy edited in US English, a lot of people seem to think I can spell now. So that's so that seemed to work. But yeah, so for my new series, my learning was, okay, obviously the US market is bigger. They prefer the character illustrations. So that's what I'm going to go with. And it has had perhaps the expected effect where Songs of Chaos sells so well in the US, but it seems like it's a slightly harder sell for the UK, at least online. Now, when people actually see it in flesh, like when people are seeing it on a table at FantasyCon or wherever else, they tend to pick it up straight away. They tend to really get drawn to it, but maybe somehow there's something in the air, like they look at it and they maybe think, oh, that's too young or something because it's an illustrated cover. Again, we can only put up one cover in one version. So I went with the US and I don't regret it. But so I was learning that. So yeah, it's like looking at what was working in the US or seemed to be working in the US and then tailoring everything for that, including the cover up. The first cover of Ascendant was different from what it is now. It was a sort of it was you can see it on my website. It's a kind of darker nightscape scene, which I thought would make sense because it was like a kind of the big battle at night, and the dragon in the series is like lunar magic. So I wanted to see the moon. I kind of wanted all that, but it's a nice piece of art. But I didn't realize how much Amazon desaturates an image on the cover. So when you go into the product page, all artwork comes out a little bit darker on the product page. So it was if you just see this nighttime cover on the phone or something at a kind of normal brightness, it looks great. But once it's up on the Amazon page, it just darkened it just too much. It was just, and it was selling, but it wasn't selling. I was like, this should be selling. This is a great concept. I've nailed this. I knew I'd nailed it. I was like, this should be selling much more. So I switched the cover, and as soon as I switched the cover, it was like it had been relaunched again for the first time. It went flying back up to like better than it was at launch. So changing the cover, I've changed that cover, and I changed the trilogy cover from my first series. And again, same effect. It made it so much better. So cover art, so important. And having the ability to fix that and change it as an indie author has saved my career. I know that. It would make me a little worried about handing that over, because at least I've been able to fix it in the past.
Yeah, once the book's out the door, it's difficult for me to change anything. I have to go back to the publisher and get them to try and change some things. But equally, just fixing like the text, if there's a mistake in the book, that's difficult. Changing the cover it's extremely rare that I've seen covers change in traditional, unless they do a new edition years later.
They change if it does a new edition, but those are typically for very successful books, right? So it's kind of it's unusual. I do know. I think famously, the Mistborn covers in the US were terrible to begin with, and Sanderson managed to convince them to change it, and that saved that series, as the legend goes. So it does happen, but it's very hard, like you say. Whereas if you're indie, if you feel like you've messed up and your cover isn't working, you have the option to try and change it, and that's almost always the better option than spending more money advertising something that isn't working. It's hard to diagnose problems sometimes, but if you think, do you know what, the cover just isn't quite working out, it's better to put some money towards a new cover than just keep hitting your head off a brick wall, so to speak.
With advertising. The other thing I want to talk about is length of book, because epic fantasy can be really long in traditional, but I think because they do rely, as you said, traditional bookshops and traditional publishers rely on selling physical copies a lot of the time. You know, at least I'd say at least 50%, if not more, is physical, which therefore requires the cost of paper, which therefore requires, and that's not as much of a factor for indie. As you said, if you're saying a lot of ebook and a lot of audio, an actual physical book per book is more costly to print. So do you worry about the length of the book, or do you just write the story as long as it needs to be and then you deal with it?
No, I write it the length it needs to be, but there are some considerations, right? So that, as you say, if you were being hyper rational, you might think, okay, we're traditional publishers, we rely heavily on print, so let's try to get our print margins as good as they can.
Yep.
Obviously, if in Kindle Unlimited, we get paid per page read.
Yep. So
the longer the book, in theory, the more money you'll get out of the Kindle Unlimited system because there's more pages. But, you know, equally, it takes you longer to write a big book.
And we're not insane like Ryan, who writes a stupidly long book.
Yeah, exactly. There will always be that person that writes very long books, but also quite quickly. There will always be those people, you know, screw them. For everyone else,
that's for you, Ryan. You're welcome.
Swear you. For everyone else, if you're, you know, if you're writing a long book, say 200,000 words, you likely could have written 100,000 word books in the same time. Maybe not quite, but it probably washes out in that sense. Like it probably washes out in terms of the page reads and things like that. But in audio, it's actually very important. Epic Fantasy sells disproportionately well in audio. This is because the Audible system is set up to work on buying books with credits, not really with cash.
Yeah.
The audiobooks in cash can be very, very high, $50, $60, or people buy with their membership credits, which they can either buy in bulk sometimes for cheap, or it's that monthly 1 or 2 credits. And you pay $15 in the States or whatever for your credit. So your credit has got a set amount of around $15 or maybe a bit more. So you want to use that credit on a book as long as you possibly can, because that's the better value. That doesn't mean the book is particularly good, but there is that mindset that people do see a long audiobook as much better value for the credit.
Yes.
Of course they will. So now Audible doesn't pay out much more for the length compared to Kindle Unlimited. So it's not the case that if you have a very, very long audiobook, you will make proportionally more money than a shorter book, but there are some breakpoints. 10 hours or under, you're going to get this is if you're self-publishing it. Obviously, people are going through studios that we're not 100% sure of the maths there, but so I'm quite a rare indie author. I fully self-fund and self-publish all my audio, which is most people sell those rights to a studio like Podium, Tanto, Dreamscape, Recorded Books, etc. I self-fund it and self-publish through ACX, so I see all this quite clearly. So if your book is about 10 hours or under, you'll get maybe $4 back for a sale. Between 10 and 20, it's going to be $5 to $5.50, kind of in that range. And then at 20 hours and over, you'll be $6 plus. But my 46-hour box set gets $6.20, $30 per sale, and my books that are 25 hours get about $6.20 per sale. So there's a kind of hard point. At over 20 hours, you don't get much more back, but you will get the higher payout possible. And so, you know, over time, obviously that adds up. It adds up if you're getting the volume. If you're getting $1 plus extra out for an audiobook, it might, for every sale, and it sells well, then it was probably worth the length increase. And because I sell so well in audio, and that's where I get the bulk of my income, at the back of my mind, there is that sense, every book needs to hit the 20-hour mark, which means it's got to be 200,000 plus, right? Because that's going to be a major benefit to me. We'll see. In the future, I'd like to write a little bit shorter, but I don't want to, you know, kneecap myself for no reason. But that's something to consider. When it comes to the print, it is very, very, very expensive for these PLD copies, obviously. But the main reason why I think a lot of indie authors just went, okay, well, screw it, is because the print sales were just hilariously low, really, for the most
Yeah.
part. I mean, that's changing, at least. I mean, at least for myself. You know, Ryan's always done very well in print. Seeing his success has kind of spurred me to change how I'm doing things and shake things up, and that's and now print is actually moving more copies for me, and I'm getting a lot more out of those copies than I used to, and it's starting to contribute to the bottom line. So that is starting to shift. But again, I think that's I think that's partly an awareness thing, right? I think the people who were most likely to want to read a print book were just going into Waterstones or Barnes & Noble, and they were in that ecosystem, and they were really tuned into the blogs or the booktubers who all run in that circle.
Yeah. So
that's the only print books they're seeing. That's what they're buying, and they just weren't really aware of any indie books, really, or if they were, they, you know. So I think Ryan's really sort of blazed the trail in making them aware of an indie series, and then they've kind of, oh, there was other stuff as well. So I think that's sort of, and we've written in a similar space, so I think that's partly helping. Also working with the Broken Binding in the UK, that's really helped, just to get more awareness out to that print market. So my print sales are improving now, and it's becoming a series, and it's really contributing, whereas before it was just negligible. But yeah, the print costs, they are what they are. They're really big. We have to charge a lot more money. But despite having to charge a lot, I mean, not too much more in some ways. I mean, the paperbacks definitely are a lot more expensive than a traditional paperback, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But in hardback, we can charge about the same. So that's a kind of fairer thing, you know. Like, I know in the States, I think hardbacks are going to be $25 to $30 these days. And that's where mine are. They're in that range. The paperbacks are obviously a lot more, and that might be off-putting to people. But anyone inclined to buy a hardback, the prices are pretty much the same. Just because you can push it higher, and the actual print cost between a paperback and a hardback is like maybe £2 to £3 maximum on our end, but you can charge a lot more, so it kind of makes it look a little better. But no, I mean, the series it has to be the length that it is. I do factor that in for audio. I do want to make sure I get to over 20 hours, so that you are looking at 200,000 words for that. But it's an epic fantasy. It's big, right? I mean, that's kind of how they run. You know, you don't even need to try that hard. If you just have 5 or 6 POVs, you're going to be at that limit, I think.
Yeah, it's that thing of saying that, you know, print is not as important to those readers, and it makes sense. And the fact that maybe some of them may have considered it, but they see the price difference of a print on demand versus the ebook, and they go, I'll just get it. But now there's that thing of, you know, you and I were both at FantasyCon last month, and people want to buy the physical book. You're there at the table, they see your physical books, and they're like, oh, I may have read it, but they'll double dip because they can get the book there and they can get you to sign it. Or, you know, a bunch of people turned up for Ryan's signing who already had his books and read it, but they wanted the physical book and they wanted to meet him and they wanted to get it signed. So you're getting more double dipping, I think, with indie as well as traditional now.
Yeah, I think I think in the past the only people buying print from indies were probably people double dipping. As I say, I think now I'm actually selling. I think I'm open. I think I'm opening up a whole new market to my books. Like I think that the big jump in print for me this year is just a whole new swathe of readers who that's their preference, but they just weren't aware I existed because of the channels they move in. So I think you're right. It's a bit of both. But it's interesting that once there is that awareness there, I'm sure some people are put off by the price, but not quite as many as we thought. I think, again, it's that the awareness is the biggest problem. But if they see a book and they see it recommended a lot and it looks great to them, they seem, you know, people will be willing to invest if they know they're going to like it. So it's always about the awareness, isn't it? And if you are thinking of self-publishing for the first time and you do write epic fantasy, just write it as long as it needs to be. Don't worry, go a little bit longer, because you will benefit from that Kindle Unlimited money, which when you're starting out is so important. That's fine. If it turns out long, that's fine. Just you'll benefit from KU. If you're able eventually to get an audiobook produced, either by selling the rights or doing it yourself, you will get some benefit from the length of that as well. The print is always going to be expensive, and you're not going to be doing print runs, at least not straight away. You're not going to be trying to batter down the bookshop doors and convincing them, because they're not going to take it. So don't worry too much about it. Play to your strengths and worry about things like print a bit later when it matters a bit more and you've got the budget.
Yeah, I know that as a traditionally published author, I do still have to do a lot of the stuff, promotion and marketing and all that kind of thing. But there's so much more as being indie. Like we don't, most don't know anything about Amazon and Kindles and any of that kind of thing. There's balance. Like we get money coming in and someone else handles all that other stuff for us. You're doing the whole lot yourself. So that must pull on your time when you'd prefer to be writing as well sometimes.
Yeah, it can. It depends on the time of the year, I suppose. For me, I think if I was to try and look back at the beginning, I was spending an awful lot of time, as I've mentioned, trying to push the boulder up the damn hill. But very so often you burn out doing that and you just go back to the writing, because the writing is always, for both of us, however you're publishing, the most important part. And the best way to sell your first book is to put the sequel out, to put the second book out. So actually, definitely you need to try and sell it a little bit, but don't go overboard. Definitely just make sure you're writing primarily. That's your first and foremost priority. Yeah. And worry about everything else and you'll package it really well and put a great cover on it and stuff. But then worry about ads and other marketing stuff later, right in the morning, market in the afternoon, almost in that sort of sense of like, make sure the writing's getting done. Because I do see the sort of horror story that I occasionally see will be people who post threads saying, I put this book out, a year ago, I've spent all year trying to sell it and it's not working, but they haven't written the next one. So they're just,
right.
That's the wrong thing. Like it is going to be really hard to sell a debut book. It just is. It's really hard. The people you see doing it straight out the gate are the like 1% rare exceptions, however they've done it, whether it's blind luck or something else that's happened. Like that's very unusual. It's going to be much more likely that you just keep at it persistently and stubbornly. Throughout a year, if I'm working on a draft, if I'm deep in the first draft and then deep into edits, I'm spending most of my time writing. When I get to the point of like, okay, we've wrapped that, I'm now preparing for the launch and stuff like that, most of my time then shifts to launch prep, reaching out to all the reviewers, making sure copies are being mailed out, everything involved in that. Working with Peter, my narrator, going to the studio for the recording. That's really fun, actually. That's a really great part of the process. All that stuff. So like, there'll be times of the year where, yeah, I'm not writing for a couple of months. I think or even more like this year, the book was completely wrapped up end of March. I didn't do any writing over April, May, June, or July. Wow. Because I was doing the launch prep, the marketing. I also had a ton of weddings to go to, including my own. So there was a lot going on.
Yeah, good reason. Yeah, good reason.
Yes, yeah. But I was planning the next book, so there was like work, but it wasn't like writing work. But yeah. That's why because the launch prep is getting bigger and bigger now, because I've got more options now and stuff like that. If you're starting out or it's just a sequel, you won't need to spend 4 months working on all that stuff. You just want to write, market where you can, do what you can, but always focus on the writing. I think that's definitely, because there are some people, and in some ways the most successful indie authors I've ever known are people who have never advertised, have never spent a penny, have never reached out to reviewers or anyone. They just diligently put books out. Sometimes 2 to 3 really big books, epic fantasy, a year.
Yeah.
And they're just very steady, and it just keeps hitting that system, and the readers come to expect it and love it, and it just keeps building and building and building. And you could go to a convention and mention their names and people give you a blank face, because they've never heard of it, but they sell tons and tons of books. And so that's always the most important part. It's always the most important part.
Yeah, I think at FantasyCon that kind of proved the point where, we mentioned someone's name and some people were like, because the majority of people there were paper readers, as you say.
Yes.
Whereas if you ask online, people are like, yeah, I've heard of that person. And you're like, that's
one thing that I've not, the readers not knowing who people are makes a lot of sense. I would say that, and you can let me know if this is unfair. I think, not a mistake, but I think sometimes traditional authors aren't always aware of what's going on, what's selling well online, because you guys aren't necessarily checking Amazon rankings that often, or if you are, you're typically checking just the UK chart. Obviously, we are always checking .com, and stuff like that. And if you're always looking at the rankings and seeing what's there, you'll see the stuff that's shifting a lot. You'll see who's selling really well. You have that, and obviously, and we are aware of the big trad offers too. So we have that kind of dual awareness. Whereas if you guys aren't really looking at the rankings that much, you're not going to see it. But it might be worth every so often dipping in just to be like, what is actually what is actually selling and who is selling on .com, because that is the biggest store. And it might be worth just looking at that, because if you are only looking at what's selling, say, in Waterstones or even Barnes and Noble, that's not a rounded picture anymore. It's a very narrow picture. And in fact, you want to occasionally check the Audible charts too, because all of it is the whole thing. It's very holistic. It's worth seeing. And that way people won't be taken so back when they come across someone that's like doing, it happens all the time. It happens still to me. And like, they'll be like, this is this person. They're like, what? Oh my God. But yeah.
I think being traditionally published authors, some forget that you still have to be kind of business minded. It is a creative space. It's a creative job. It's writing. And I think a lot of people don't have that business awareness. They don't have that same desire or even interest in it. They just want to write the books. And by being traditionally published, they think they can not do a bunch of stuff. And so they just don't do it. And sometimes the books still do well. But I think I've always, I've got a business background. I've always had that other foot in the other world, and I constantly ask questions of my publisher and my editors, and they sometimes look at me like, why is he asking that? But I'm thinking about it from a business side and a creative side, and so I'm probably a little bit different to some authors, I think. But yeah, I think it is important for indie or traditional. I think you need to have that to know not just what's going on in the market, but what's trending at the moment and what's doing really well.
Yeah, I think you have to, even if you don't read every book, because of course you can't, but it's just good to see like what's out there, what seems to be happening, what seems to be working. Otherwise I would feel really weird about being in the dark. Still I feel in the dark about stuff because it's a really complex, mysterious business. But the more information you have, I think the better, probably.
Yeah,
you never know, like just having that rounded picture. I know I can only speak for myself, but I know I try to keep a fair tab on what's going on in trad and just how that system and that world works and what it's like for authors going through that. And I listen to those podcasts. Equally, I listen to the indie stuff, and I've got a lot of indie friends. So like, even though I'm not traditionally published, then it's not. I may one day be. We'll see. But even if I never am, I always want to know how that side works and how it all functions, because I don't know, just like, it's hard to explain. It just seems like the right thing to do.
It's the industry.
It's I need to know. Yeah, it's
still part of the same
industry.
Right? We're both writing books. We both write fantasy. It's still the same industry, whether it's indie or trad. So it's same space. Definitely. Right. Well, I think we kind of reached a natural end there. But just want to say thanks for coming on and for sharing all of your knowledge and information about this. Hopefully, people have got some good, useful tips to go forward if they're looking at self-publishing or or traditional publishing, but they've got a better idea of the work that's needed for both sides now.
Yeah, it's hard work however you do it. I think I think anyone that thinks either way is easier it's like both ways are really hard in different ways, but just they're hard. It's hard. It's a hard work. It's a hard game, but yeah, hard work. But just if you're stubborn and persistent and you keep at it, there's a much better chance it's going to work.
Brilliant. That's a great place to end. All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Stephen. Nice being here.
Bye.